Welcome learner to our next lecture 12 which is based on utility. So before going to the utility analysis, let's talk about what is utility. So here we can say that utility is nothing but a want satisfying power of a commodity. So here you can say that what consumer consumes, it gives a maximum satisfaction, that is called a utility. In this lecture, we will see the cardinal and ordinal utility, in which cardinal utility which based on number and ordinal utility which is based on a order. So let's talk about the utility functioning. Before moving to the next slide, let's see the learning objective of utility analysis. From this lecture, you have to understand the concept of utility, its role in consumer behavior, also explain the total utility and marginal utility with their proper meaning, graphs and diagram, and their relationship. Also identify the different types of utility. Then next is understand the assumption of utility analysis, also analyzes the importance of utility in decision making and consumption. And the last is evaluate the limitations of utility theory and real life situation. Now, let's talk about the utility. What is utility? So here we can say that want satisfying power of a commodity, or in a layman word, utility is the satisfaction or want satisfying power of a consumer derived from consumption of goods and services. So why consumer buying certain goods? That's a question maybe arise because those goods give them satisfaction. So here, what are the key features of utility? So we can say that the utility is a subjective phenomena because it differs from person to person. We can say that some people have higher utility, some has low utility. The next is relative. The key feature of utility is relative, varies from time to time. The satisfaction level of a consumer may be varies due to time and situation and place. And here the last is utility cannot be measurable, cannot be physically seen. When we talk about that utilities are not measurable, but according to the Marshall, the utility can be measurable, and according to the Higgs, the utility cannot be measurable. We can see in the next chapter. So here, these are the two examples of utility. You have seen that a glass of water to a thirsty person. The thirsty person needs a water that's give him a high utility. It means it's give him high satisfaction. But the person who is not thirsty, a glass of water to a person gives them a low utility, but it is not satisfied them. Why? Because he is not thirsty. Let's see the various definitions of utility. The first definition of utility given by Alfred Marshall, who says that utility is the power of a commodity to satisfying human wants. It means anything that satisfying a want has utility according to the Marshall. The next is Jevons. Jevons says that utility is the capacity of a commodity to give pleasure or satisfaction. So here Jevons linked utility with pleasure and satisfaction that derived from consumption. The next is Robinson. Robinson gives the definition of utility is the significance which goods have for us because they satisfied our wants. So here Robinson give the goods are important because they fulfill the human wants. The next definition given by Fisher, which says that utility is the desirability of goods and services. So here Fisher says that utility depends upon how desirable a good is to a consumer. The next is modern definition of utility. Modern definition says that utility is the want satisfying power of a goods or services. So here in all the definition, all the layman says that utility is nothing but a satisfying of a consumer, or we can say that it is linked with consumption, or It can be says that want satisfying power of a commodity, that is human wants, called a utility. Some important points we have seen that here you have seen that utility is a subjective phenomena because it varies from person to person. I already explained to an earlier slide. Give the example of thirsty person and non-thirsty person. Then again, utility is a usefulness. Even harmful goods can give a utility, for example, cigarettes and alcohol. The next is utility is a psychological, it depends upon the satisfaction. Let's see the assumption of utility analysis. The first assumption is rationality. As we have seen that the consumer is a rational, and we can say that true aim to maximize satisfaction of a consumer, the consumer must be rational. If the consumer must be rational, then we take the maximize satisfaction of the goods and services. The next one is diminishing marginal utility. As the marginal utility decreases as more consumption are consumed. Diminishing marginal utility defines that as more and more units of a consumption units we can consume, after that, the certain point without interruption, the marginal utility tends to decrease as more and more we are consumed. The next one is independent utility. We can say that utility of one good is independent of another. As we know, there are two goods. For example, apple and milk. So apple and milk are two different goods, and there are two different goods. There are two different independent utility of the goods. The next assumption is utility is measurable. So utility can be measured in cardinal numbers. It was given by the Alfred Marshall. According to Alfred Marshall, utility can be measurable in cardinal numbers. The next is constant marginal utility of money. Here, Marshall says that value of money remains constant. The next is single commodity consumption. Here, the laymen say that it focus on one good at a time. That's why the diminishing marginal utility maybe tends to diminish. Let's define the concept of total utility and marginal utility. Let's talk about the first. What is total utility? Total utility basically refers to the total satisfaction a consumer from consuming a certain quantity of a good. As the consumption increases, the total utility generated increases but at a decreasing rate. For example, you have seen that if a person eats slices of pizza, in the first slice, as you know, I have told you that the utility can be measurable in numbers. Let's take one example first. If the consumer takes first slice of pizza, he or she may has 10 units of satisfaction. But after eating the second slide, he or she may have only 8 units of satisfaction. It means that the total utility is increasing but in a decreasing rate. The third slice, the consumer may get 6 units of satisfaction. What is the total utility defined? The total utility defines that total satisfaction a consumer get from consuming a certain quantity of a goods. So here we can add the first, second and third slice of units, that is 10, 8 and 6. We got 24 units. And here we can say that the total utility generally increases but at a decreasing rate. And when we talk about the marginal utility, it's nothing but an addition to the total utility. For example, you have seen that in the first slice, we have seen that 10 units of satisfaction. And after taking the second slice, the consumer will get only 8 units of satisfaction. So what we do, marginal utility defines that additional to the total utility. It means that how much it will be decreases? 2. So we can say that 2 is the marginal utility of consumer. Again, consumer take the third slice, if gives it gives 6 units of satisfaction. Again, we have seen that 2 units are being reduced. So, marginal utility defines refers to additional satisfaction gained from consuming one more unit of a good. So, what is the formula of marginal utility? The marginal utility says that change in total utility divided by the change in quantity. We can write on this also, that is change in total utility divided by change in quantity, that we can write as. Now, let's talk about the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility explains that as the consumption increases, the marginal utility decrease. Now, let's see the total utility curve. This is the total utility in the vertical axis, and marginal utility again in the vertical axis, and in here horizontal axis we can take the unit of consumption. As you know, firstly, total utility is increasing, but after a certain point it may be saturated point where the total utility is increasing at decreasing rate. Let's see the condition first. First, when the consumer take 1 unit slice of pizza, they get maximum utility with 10 units. It means more consumption, more satisfying initially. Initially, consumer get 10 units of maximum satisfaction. But after a certain point, when we reach to the saturation point with consumer has no like to eat that particular slice of pizza, the satisfaction stops increasing and it may be at decreasing rate. But after the saturation point, beyond that point, dissatisfaction start. Firstly, we can say that TU is increasing, but after that it may be saturated and after it may be decreases. Now, let's see the marginal utility case. When we link total utility and marginal utility, we can say that the MU first gives the additional unit, give less satisfaction, but at this point no extra satisfaction, that MU is 0. When the total utility is goes to saturation point, it means that the marginal utility is 0. It means beyond this point the total utility is decreases and MU may be negative. So when the marginal utility is 0, the total utility is maximum. We can link this diagram with this, right? So after that, the MU will be negative. So this is the important relationship where when the MU is greater than 0, it means that the total utility is increasing, right? And when the MU is lesser than 0, it means total utility is decreasing. And when the MU is equal to 0, the total utility is maximum. This is the total utility and marginal utility curve. Now, let's talk about the types of total utility. First is increasing total utility. When we talk about when the consumption increases, the total utility increases at a decreasing rate. For example, here you have seen that example. The first burger, the consumer will get 10 units of satisfaction, but in second burgers, the consumer will get only 8, and in the third burger, the consumer will get only 6. It means the total utility is increasing but a decreasing rate when the more units are consumed. This is the stage of increasing total utility. Now, just see in this particular graph where total utility have been seen in vertical axis, where you have seen that total utility is increasing, where marginal utility is positive, right? When the total utility is increasing, marginal utility is positive. Now let's see the next maximum total utility, where total utility at highest point, it means when it's in the saturation point, mu is 0. This is the point of total utility, saturation point or maximum TU. It means the marginal utility 0. It means consumer is fully satisfied, no more units they wanted. Now, if consumer may beyond the total utility point without they want, then total utility may be decreasing and marginal utility may be negative. So let's see this decreasing total utility point when the consumption continue beyond the satisfaction level. Beyond satisfaction level means the highest TU point. Further consumption leads to discomfort and mu becomes negative. This is the total utility and marginal utility difference. Let's see the types of marginal utility. As you know, marginal utility is nothing but additional satisfaction to a consumer get from consuming one more unit of a good, or it can be say that additional to the total utility. There are three types of marginal utility in which we have seen the positive marginal utility, in which when the consumption of additional unit increases total utility, it is the where the marginal utility is positive. We can already see in the graph this. Look at this graph where the positive mu, where the total utility is increases. For example, in the beginning stage of consumption, every additional unit gives extra satisfaction. First chocolate give higher satisfaction and second chocolate give additional satisfaction. That is the positive marginal utility. So here marginal utility is positive but decreasing gradually. Then when we talk about the zero marginal utility, it means consumer is fully satisfied and no consumption is required. So here there is no change in the total utility, where marginal utility it's become zero, because after reaching a saturation point or consumer is fully satisfied, there is no change in the total utility and mu is zero. Look at this table. In the third unit, the mu become zero. So for example, after eating many slices of pizza, one more slice give no extra satisfaction. So at this point, total utility is maximum. We can see this is saturation point, right? The next one is negative marginal utility, means after fully satisfied, if the consumption of additional unit consumer takes, it reduces the total utility and marginal utility becomes negative. Look at this point. After taking the fourth unit, the total utility may decreases and mu become negative. There are the three types of marginal utility which is directly relate with the total utility. Okay, now let's recap this summary. The initial stage where the total utility is increasing and mu is positive, we can say that mu is greater than 0. But after saturation point, the Tu is maximum and mu is 0. But beyond the saturation point, the Tu is decreasing and mu becomes negative. Let's see the important observation. So here mu curve is downward sloping. That is the law of diminishing mu. So we can say that when we talk about the marginal utility, in the earlier slide we have seen that the marginal utility it's in a diminishing way. The second is TU curve is increasing when mu is greater than 0. We have already seen that this is the point where mu is 0. Now when the TU is maximum, mu is equal to 0. This is the saturation point where TU maximum mu is equal to 0. The third one is when the total utility is decreasing, mu is lesser than Zero. They are the three initial stages in the TU and MU relation. So we can say that total utility increases at diminishing rates because MU keeps falling. Okay, why utility is important? Utility plays an important role economic and business decision making. Why? Because it explains the consumer behavior. It understands why consumer buying certain goods. Next, basis of demand theory for the importance of utility. Utility is the foundation of demand actually. So higher utility gives higher demand. This is the price, demand and quantity relationship in which demand is downward sloping. The next is helping in pricing decision. Basically, firm uses utility to decide product pricing strategy by the consumer demand and price of commodity. The next one is resource allocation. Here, utility helps business allocate resources efficiently, which is based on consumer taste and preferences. Again, it helps government policies because government uses utility concept for taxation policies and welfare program. The next is maximization of satisfaction. As you know, the utility which helps consumer to allocate their income to get maximum satisfaction. We have already seen in the TU and MU diagram. Let's see the relationship between the utility and demand, which have seen that higher utility give higher demand for luxury goods and smartphone. Medium utility give the moderate demand, for example, clothing and accessories, and low utility give the low demand, that is for basic goods like rice and wheat. Okay, when we study any topic, we have seen there are some limitations. Let's talk about the limitations of utility. The first limitation we have seen that utility cannot be measurable because utility is a subject phenomena and cannot be measured accurately. We cannot state that the utility is in a cardinal number measured. The second one is unrealistic assumption. Assumption like rational behavior and constant utility of money. You have seen that consumer is irrational and whenever he or she maybe select the goods according to their maximum satisfaction, we cannot say that consumer is a rational behavior. And the next is constant utility of money. We cannot say the utility of money may be constant. The next limitation is it ignores psychological factor. So here we can say that utility analysis does not consider the emotions of consumers habit and social influences which may affect the demand. The next limitation is independent utility is unrealistic. In here real life goods are interdependent, for example complementary goods and substitute goods. So here we cannot say that the independent utility is unrealistic. The next is difficult to apply in real life situation. So hard to calculate utility in practical situation because it cannot be measurable in cardinal numbers. The next is it changes over time. As you know, the consumer preference, taste, place, situations are changes over the time. So we cannot measure the utility in practical life situations. Thank you learners for listening me. On the next lecture, we will study about the law of diminishing marginal utility and consumer behavior.